Welcome. Today we are digging into a fascinating mystery right at the foundations of Islam. It's a story about forgotten monotheists and, more importantly, a brilliant theological strategy that literally redrew the religious map of the world.
Okay, let's get right into it. The central question we're tackling today is this. Was there a real historical group of pure monotheists, these people called hanifs, wandering around Mecca before Muhammad? Or is this idea a later theological invention, something created to solve a very specific problem?
So first, you have to understand the traditional story. It presents us with these figures, the hanifs, and they're portrayed as this crucial link, a bridge connecting the polytheistic, idol-worshipping world of pre-Islamic Arabia to the new monotheistic faith that's about to burst onto the scene.
And we get these really compelling stories about men like Zayd ibn Amr. I mean, the tradition paints this picture of him standing at the Kaaba, openly rejecting the idols, refusing to eat meat sacrificed to them, and telling everyone he follows the pure religion of Abraham. He's the perfect proto-Muslim, but conveniently, he dies right before the revelations to Muhammad begin.
Now, this is where, as historians, we have to pump the brakes. Because when we go looking for hard, contemporary evidence for Zayd and others like him, proof from their own time, outside of biographies written much later, the trail just goes completely cold. And this forces us to ask a really tough question. Are we dealing with history, or are we dealing with memory? To figure that out, we have to understand the term itself. In the Quran, hanif isn't just a label. It is a powerful theological category. It describes a person, and most famously Abraham, who embodies this pure, original monotheism. Someone who turns away from all the false stuff and towards the one true God.
And this is where it gets really interesting. There's a linguistic puzzle. Scholars like Arthur Jeffrey noticed that in Syriac, the major Christian language spoken right next door to Arabia, a nearly identical word, hanpa, meant the exact opposite. It was a slur. It meant pagan or heathen. So this raises a wild question. Did the Quran take a religious insult and brilliantly flip it, turning it into the ultimate badge of honor?
This little linguistic twist is actually a clue that points to a much bigger idea, a move of theological and political genius that scholars have come to call the Abraham strategy. Just look at this timeline. Abraham lived centuries before Moses and millennia before Jesus. So, by defining Abraham as the model hanif, the original pure monotheist, Islam could position itself not as some new faith competing with Judaism and Christianity, but as the oldest, most authentic faith of them all, a restoration, not an invention.
And the Quran makes this move explicitly. This verse is a theological bombshell. It basically bypasses the established authority of both the synagogue and the church. It says in effect, you guys came later. Our faith, the one being revealed to Muhammad, is a direct line back to Abraham's original pure belief.
And as the scholar Angelica Neuwirth argues, this wasn't just some abstract theology. This was a powerful act of 7th century identity politics. It was a strategy to decenter the religious authority of old world power centers like Jerusalem and Rome, and to place Arabia and the new community of believers right at the heart of sacred history.
But okay, if the hanifs were the local ancestors of this powerful new idea, what evidence did they actually leave behind for historians to find? Where's the proof? Well, here's the problem, that time gap. The detailed stories about the Meccan Hanif, they all come from biographies written well over a century later. And this leads skeptical historians like the late Patricia Crone to suggest these stories might be what we call retrojections, later ideas projected backward in time to create a smoother, more legitimate-looking origin story for Islam.
Okay, so if the texts are late, what about archaeology? Let's turn to the rocks. We have literally thousands of inscriptions carved by Arabs before Islam. They mention all sorts of things, gods, personal names, wars. They even mention the name Allah. Surely if a Hanif movement existed, they'd have left a mark, right?
And this number right here perfectly illustrates the historian's dilemma. 0. Despite finding inscriptions with Jewish menorahs and Christian crosses, we have not found one single pre-Islamic inscription where someone identifies themselves as a Hanif. As the historian Robert Hoyland says, for something that was supposedly a movement, that silence is deafening.
This complete lack of physical evidence forces us right into the middle of the central academic debate. Is the Hanif a historical reality, or is it a theological necessity?
So scholars are essentially split. Model A says, look, the Hanifs were a real, if maybe small and disorganized group of monotheistic seekers. But Model B argues that Hanif is mostly a theological and literary category,
an idea created by the Quran to serve a purpose, which was then fleshed out with stories by later writers.
Now, to be fair, the ancient world was religiously messy. The idea of people being in between wasn't strange at all. You had God-fearers who respected Judaism but didn't convert, you had Jewish-Christian sects like the Ebionites, and mysterious groups like the Sabians. So the existence of some lone wolf monotheistic seekers in Arabia, that's certainly not out of the question.
So, after weighing the late texts, the archaeological silence, and the broader historical context, what's the most methodologically sound conclusion we can come to?
Well, most critical historians today actually combine the models. They see it as a kind of three-step process. First, yeah, it's totally plausible that some scattered, individual monotheist seekers existed. Second, the Quran takes this vague idea and forges Hanif into a sharp, powerful theological identity, tying it directly to Abraham. And then finally, later tradition takes that powerful idea and populates it with names and stories, creating a full-blown historical movement in retrospect.
So the crucial takeaway is this. The Hanif concept probably isn't a lost historical movement that we need to go out and find. Its real power, its true historical function, was to act as a theological bridge, one built by Scripture itself to connect the new community in Arabia directly to the most ancient and revered patriarch of them all, Abraham.
And that leaves us with a final thought. Maybe the whole search for a historical Hanif movement misses the point. Perhaps the true genius of the Hanif was never about a group of people at all, but about the revolutionary power of an idea, a story that had the power to redraw the entire map of faith.